I think there is a mindset gap between the two parties, right? Especially in sharing of the data. So first, would you agree with me or not? Or if you do, why is that and how to overcome?
So now I'm a carrier, my data is valuable. I would like to sell you this data. That truck was delayed due to traffic, due to weather, whatever the case may be. Without that data, you can't take action. With that action, you're going to end up in that situation where no one's happy. The driver's not happy, the warehouse is not happy, and the carrier's not happy.
I don't want you to give me any, deep secrets and all that, but I want to just pick your brain at a high level, a person who work both operationally, career, and technical part commercially. So how to build a secure or sustainable data sharing platform? If you think about the procurement part, the planning part, and then go to logistics and last mile, I think the whole agentic AI and AI with the control towers have the biggest transformation or opportunity for transformation.
I think that agentic AI is going to be transformational when it comes to the logistics industry.
I think, especially now, maybe not before, but now, making a software technology solution is dead easy. Agents can do it. So how do you keep yourself learning ahead of the curve and in a such fast-moving, intensive requirement?
You always have to keep learning. If you don't, unfortunately, you're going to get left behind, especially with how quickly things are moving with AI.
Most common myth about data partnership you often have to debunk. A book or a podcast or maybe a thinker who has influenced your approach of data and logistics.
Be careful not to institutionalize waste.
So, biggest aha moment of your career in supply chain technology?
That's a tough one because there probably, meant dozens of them. I would say it goes back to something I said earlier. It's the role of IT procurement.
This video is brought to you by us, SCM Dojo. We provide awesome courses, guides, best practices for supply chain community. Hi folks, welcome to one more episode of the Supply Chain Show. Today I'm super excited because I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is how data, AI in the technology space is evolving and how it's going to reshape the future. So today I have an industry veteran, 20 years of experience in basically big companies like WiseTech, Project44 FourKites, Maersk, Mike DeAngelis. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me today.
First of all, thanks for your time. I know you're a busy person, and I was inspired when thanks for responding on my LinkedIn request for being on the show, and I'm super excited to talk to you. Right, but before we dive into the topic, I want to basically explore your, let's call it, background, and because you've been into this logistics tech space for the last 30 years, right? Your CV is fantastic. You work for Maersk, WiseTech, Project44, FourKites. I mean, all the big brands, multi-billion-dollar brands. So I think you've seen the evolution, how we've gone from, let's call it, archaic systems to now really forefront of the technology. So just give me a very bird's eye view of that. How does it work?
So when I first started in the industry, I was frontline customer service for Maersk. And one of my jobs was to handle bookings, pick up the phone, handle bookings for customers, get the documentation off of the fax machine. So very manual processes, highly reliant on individuals such as myself to provide whatever data the customer is looking for, whether that was, I need a booking confirmation, I need to know where my container is. And what I noticed as my career progressed within Maersk is the shift of these manual processes going to their website, right? It's web enabling these processes so that you no longer needed to have a person on the other end of the phone or to get that fax from the fax machine. So it really grounded me in terms of my knowledge and my respect for how manual processes could be brought on, to websites and applications so that create additional efficiencies for both the company and for the customer. So we really went from where is my container via phone call, eventually a email, to going to a website, and customer self-service is basically what transitions. So rather than that data being explained to you, now you needed to go and look at it yourself, right? And make your determination on, okay, well, I can see that the container's on the vessel, and it loaded 3 weeks ago, but when is that vessel arriving? And I think one of the biggest takeaways from early in my career was that data was siloed, right? It was highly manual to get access to data, and you went to a tracking application to get your tracking data. You went to the booking overview to get the booking confirmation number, and it did not flow. And I can see that the progress we've made over the last 3 decades has really gone from taking individual pieces of data, um, highly siloed, very narrow use cases for each request, and now shifting towards, autonomous uh, uh, AI agents, working together in order to make it much more seamless from end to end, so that you don't need, to have that manual interaction, so that someone can tell you where your container is. Now you're really heading into a space where, the data point itself isn't as valuable as the chain of data points. And then what can you automate or what can you learn from that?
Right. So that leads to my question, which I have always in mind, because I don't know a lot of people who has actually worked for carriers and tech companies, right? Generally, you're a tech person or the carrier person, and you work a carriers person. You work for both. But I think there is a mindset gap between the two parties, right? Especially in sharing of the data. So first, would you agree with me or not? Or if you do, why is that and how to overcome?
Yes, thank you. Having worked on both sides, I can recognize the fact that a lot of it has to do with the customer relationship, right? So you've got a carrier, be that air, ocean, truck, regardless of mode, they feel that they own the customer relationship, right? The customer is booking that, segment of transportation, or maybe even the entire end-to-end um, uh, orchestration of their goods going from point A to point B to point C. And to have a data provider, be that a software player, be that, someone creating a um, application for that particular customer to use, it gets between, in the carrier's mind, between themselves and their customer. And I think it's that standoffishness, if I can say that. There's a trust issue there. I think that is something we can expand upon, because that
Yeah.
has really been a theme, from having been on multiple sides of this equation. That the trust that the software provider is not going to somehow, uh, get between the customer and the carrier.
Yeah. So I want to dig deep on this core point of data sharing, right? So we talked about the three V's of supply chain, visibility, velocity, and variation. So visibility has been a big gain, especially before COVID. I think it was like starting out, and during COVID, it becomes like a peak. And then there's a multi-billion-dollar investments in a lot of startup. Actually, I just studied about 1,000+ startup, and visibility is one of the biggest VC spend area, right? But I still think that there is still a lack of, let's call it, still the data sharing and collaboration across logistic network, even now in 2025, is still a pain point. Why is that? Why data sharing still, I mean, be sorted? It should have been. Like, okay, let me explain my question more. So, what are the barriers, right? I know you mentioned about the trust part, but I think it's more than trust, right? For example, data quality, commercial incentive, maybe technology differences, right? So, what is the pain point? What do you think? What are the biggest barriers? I know trust is one, but in addition to trust,
Trust is definitely one. Another that you can look at to see would be um, your standards. So you've got organizations out there for air, you've had IATA for ages, but really for ocean, I think there's been a lack of a body up until the creation of the DCSA, which is bringing standards more to the forefront. Again, another collaboration across ocean carriers and other parties in the logistics chain. So I think that standards has been an issue and remains an issue. So that really goes into, I think, a bit of that integration piece that you mentioned. I think the commercial aspects are also a bit of a pain point still, because it went from, decades ago, a carrier would say, please take my data. I don't want to have to answer the phone or answer this email, you know, pushing this data far and wide, right? And companies, software companies, logistics software companies could take this data, could create a value add, right? And sell it to the customer. Fast forward to the point where now the carriers realize data is valuable, whether it's a carrier, whether it's port and terminal, it really doesn't matter. They're realizing their data is valuable. So, how does that get incorporated into it used to be data flows out to the network. Now the carrier says, I would like to get some value out of out of this data rather than just give it to you. There could be, again, a monetary aspect to it nowadays. I think that dovetails into another pain point, which is data ownership. So now I'm a carrier, my data is valuable. I would like to sell you this data. Uh, but however, there are restrictions on the data, what you can or can't use it for. That didn't exist, you know, a decade ago, or at least it didn't exist to the point that it does today, where now a carrier will say, well, yes, of course, you can use this data that I'm providing to you. However, only these particular use cases. And that is a limiting factor on both what the software provider can provide to the mutual customer, but also it puts some tension into that collaboration.
Right, right. No, so that makes sense. So I want to, before I move toward a solution, I want to explore more a little bit about the symptoms of and the impact of the problem. So let's assume the data sharing and still be a problem, right? So what is the commercial and operational implications?
So when the gaps still exist, the data is not shared freely. The data ends up in a silo. Someone doesn't want to have to pay for the data or doesn't want to deal with the restrictions. You end up with a cascade of actions or inactions. That could be a driver is going to miss the appointment that they have to deliver a container. It might be to a warehouse. It might be to the port and terminal, and that inefficiency stays, right? Where if you're collaborating and you're providing data and data is shared, maybe not freely, but data is shared amongst your partners, you can use that data to avoid circumstances where you have operational failures, right? A missed, appointment may not seem that significant, except for now, instead of taking another container or truck load and unloading that at the warehouse, they've been waiting for this driver who is definitely not going to arrive, right? And then it sets off another chain of, uh, I would say, value destruction, right? Now you put in on time, in full, penalties um, in order to try to correct that behavior versus actually go after the root cause, right? The root cause is, if I don't have the data that that truck was delayed due to traffic, due to weather, whatever the case may be. Without that data, you can't take action. With that action, you're going to end up in that situation where no one's happy. The driver's not happy, the warehouse is not happy, and the carrier's not happy.
Yes, agree. So nobody's happy right now, as you explain. No, but the thing is, they're not happy, and we know data is the real gold mine, especially in this age, right? So if I'm a carrier, I'm Maersk, for example, or top five shipping carrier or air freight carrier or whatever, and then the 3PL still playing a big part. For example, Expeditors, for example, bid up 11 billion plus business without, they call it assetless. So because it's all down to personnel and the network of data they have built, right? And then there's ports, right? All of these parties really need to come together to create the seamless or integrated set of data visibility, right? To provide the value to the end user. The way I think is, I have very, I'd say, slightly revolutionary thought process. So if you think about top 10 shipping carriers, right? Your Maersk, CPL, Hapag-Lloyd and all that, they would be doing at least 80-90%, between of the shipments, top 10. They could have said, okay, let's combine hands and let's create a visibility platform, right? By ourselves. They could have done it. IATA could have done it, right? But they didn't. Then the companies like Project44 FourKites and few other got born, and they somehow are able to convince them that, okay, give me your data and then we will gonna create. So I'm thinking why this happens, right? So how they managed to convince them to do this?
So I think there's a lot to unpack there. If we look back in history, you could look to see how many of the carriers were involved in what was INTTRA at the time.
Right.
Now it's changed hands. Um, that was a collaboration of at least a set of the largest ocean carriers um, trying to ensure that a software provider that is not under their control doesn't get between them and their customer, right? So it was for the right reasons that they collaborated and were able to provide visibility to a customer who says, I'm going to ship with these 5 carriers. I don't want to go to each one of their websites and get the specific data points that I'm looking for, 5 separate times with 5 separate logins. So it made sense, right? And that worked for a while. I think because of commercial realities, um, unfortunately, the collaboration, was no longer there, right? It was sold, half of it was sold, and then all of it was sold. So, the attempt was there. TradeLens, another attempt
Yeah.
at at least the ocean side, trying to come together. But again, this time I think it was a bit one-sided. Trying to get a particular, technology company and a particular carrier, trying to get others on board. There's definitely a competitive aspect. There's trust issues that, of course, ended up, dissolving. So you get a situation now where a third party comes in, a FourKites or a Project 44, right, and is able to bring the data together without necessarily, going and getting collaboration amongst those top carriers, right? They're working with them independently, and that's the value of having those, partnerships between the third party provider and the individual carriers. However, the pain points are still there, right? So I think what's happening now is you're really getting this, you still have this dynamic of a carrier wants to provide what the customer is looking for. In this case, visibility or what you can build upon visibility. And I guess we'll get into that. At the same time, the carrier wants to serve the customer directly. And this dynamic still prevents, in my opinion, a lot of future collaboration, right? Or at least current collaboration, where it's that, well, I don't want to provide the data that you're going to use to provide a value add to the customer, where I should be able to, as a carrier, to do that.
Right. No, so it's still very high level and it theoretically makes sense to me, right? And they somehow managed to do it. I don't want you to give me any, deep secrets and all that, but I want to just pick your brain as a high level person who would work both operationally, career, and technical part commercially. So how to build a secure or sustainable data sharing platform, right? And maybe you can give me one example of that, which we can use to explain the concept to the audience.
I think in order for that to work, we have to look to see what's in it for the parties involved, right?
Okay.
So there was, a statement made, sort of almost a mantra by the CEO of WiseTech when I worked there, which is win-win or no deal. That's what he would say. And I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing the why am I going to provide my data? You know, it still again goes back a little bit to that trust, but there's very little in return, right? Again, the customer, you get a happy customer, but that relationship is still jeopardized. So I think that in order to do it, you really need to get the trust, which you have to bring in the transparency. What is this data going to be used for? What is it not going to be used for? Work out any sort of commercial win-win. May not be a direct payment. It may be, as a carrier, I receive something valuable in return. And this is something that I've done in my career, which is try to build these win-win scenarios where it's not necessarily one, just becomes a vendor-customer relationship. I'm providing you data, so therefore you pay me. It may be there's data or value-added data that can be returned to the carrier in this case, right? Where they feel that if they're collaborating, they get something valuable back out of it, right? And I think that this is required in order to expect that there are going to be, any sort of platforms that are going to be much more of a industry collaboration versus a particular company having to have data relationships with all of the particular players versus it truly be collaborative.
Right, right, right. No, so that that make that makes sense, right? And I think with the advent of APIs, and I was actually looking for SIM Dujo, right? And I was just thinking, okay, there must be some kind of API provider available who have already consolidated all the carrier data, which I can link with the SIM Dujo and make it like a little app. And it's figured out there are plenty of people. Like there was some easy port or something, or easy point. They have done it, and there are few others like 700 players, right? Which was very interesting. So now that means the basic part of what are my shipping schedules, what are my track and trace and all that, right? It's available through all the platforms you work with, or even the smaller players. So that's good, right? But this whole famous topic of control towers. Control towers exist for a long time. There, I know some companies, 4PL, some Dutch companies I work for as well. That's what they do, and I have my opinion as well, because I think control towers are a bit overrated, or have been, because it's just information. Because any intelligence or any data to make decisions, uh, or any intelligence or data is only good if it's help you to decide, and then this after decision it help you to take action. Therefore, now known as decision intelligence, right? So this is my thesis. Because I think that the advent of AI and agents, you can really put that decision intelligence into practice to make shit happen and make things improve. Or don't wait for the overnight to come up with your carrier to come in to make a call. You can really, agent can go in and do. So I think across all, from upstream to downstream, if you think about the procurement part, the planning part, and then go to logistics and last mile, I think the whole agentic AI and AI with the control towers have the biggest transformation or opportunity for transformation. That's what I think, right? But you are into forefront of all this. I mean, you might disagree, agree. If you agree, why you disagree, or if you disagree, why you disagree.
I think that agentic AI is going to be transformational when it comes to the logistics industry. I think that, as you correctly said, it's gone from a very, where is my container? This is the current status, to now I've got a dashboard bringing in lots of different data points, allowing me to then gather some insight and make me take a decision, to automating that decision. And I think that that's where the future is going for um, AI in the logistics industry. However, you still have a number of these pain points and issues that are in there in the background without reliable data, without reducing the latency of data. You can only do so much, at the AI agent standpoint. You still need to make sure that the data you're getting is, the best data possible in order to make decisions then based on that data. So I don't see the problems going away, but I do see a tremendous amount of potential for reducing the inefficiencies, and a lot of the exception management actions that need to be taken can start to be automated to the point where you really don't talk about exception management anymore. Now it's just an automated way to deal with day to day, circumstances, traffic, weather, whatever the case may be, strikes. You need to be able to take a step back and say, okay, you know, that's where the value is. But again, it's only going to take the correct actions if it's, fed with the correct data, which goes back to the, are we collaborating? Are we partnering? Are we getting the data that we need in order to, take a automated action? If not, you're back to having to have people in that decision loop.
Right, right. No, so and not just that. I think the agent can also help right now improving the data quality, which is a huge task in the current ecosystem, right? Because you still have to manually go and improve your master data and or between different platforms, right? So that's fine. But in our show, or at least the SMU joke, I think you will be in, I think 90th or something like this. We generally talk to practitioners, the people who has actually the industry leaders who worked in the industry, supply chain directors or consultant, whatever. But you're in a unique position for me because you have been a commercial leader, right? So I want to pick your brain on this. So you have been successfully, if I was reviewing your LinkedIn, it's fascinating, right? I mean, your experience and especially the places you work for and you move your career. So that means if my study is correct, that you have been involved in a lot of partnerships, right? Between the carriers and the 3PLs and the tech providers, right? And building that commercial partnership, and again, all the issues of the transparency, speed, privacy we talked about earlier. How did you manage to do that? So give me some secrets, right? Give me some, spill some beans there.
Going, back to the win-win or no deal statement that I made earlier, from the CEO of WiseTech when I worked there, it's there has to be something in it for both sides, or else it just becomes a very transactional relationship, right? Which I don't think is going to provide the value, to call it a partnership. Again, anyone can sell data to someone else, call it a partnership, but really it's just a vendor-customer relationship. So it's being able to go in and build the trust, right? That might be having to start small. It's definitely including being, transparent. And that's something where I bring a lot to the table in my opinion on on fostering a sense of trust and fostering, that collaborative spirit, because I'm not looking to get the edge on someone else in this relationship. The carrier has data, the port and terminal has data. These are valuable, data relationships that need to be nurtured and expanded, right? But if it's not providing value, and even if it's providing monetary value back to the other party, it's not a partnership. So you really need to be able to look to see. And that's, I think, where I've had a unique experience starting at the carrier, understanding the processes, understanding the use cases for the data, and then, moving to the software provider side of things. I'm able to look to see, okay, well, what could we provide back to the carrier that would make them feel, that they're getting something out of from a partnership versus just a transactional relationship.
Right, right. No, but there's one thing in coming up with the QE, okay, it has to be a win-win or no deal, or it has to be more than transactional, it has to provide value. And when you do that, I think it's possible to do it, right? But maintaining it over the long period of time is a big challenge. A quick tip on that.
100%, because you've got turnover. So whoever I've dealt with at some of these, carriers over the years, you know, they move on. Now you have to build trust with someone else. Usually there is an actual physical agreement involved. So someone may interpret that as, why did we sign this? Why are we doing this in the first place? And start to question things. So I think, turnover is definitely a challenge in that relationship. It's also IT procurement. It is a challenge, right? They're looking to see, what it is they can get from the other party. It's a, fantastic, um, uh, position to be in. However, it's less collaborative and more, the company being a carrier, port and terminal, whoever has this procurement team, that can be a challenge as well. And that doesn't always foster a a partnership type of relationship. That becomes a bit more of a customer vendor relationship. So yeah, these are challenges, and these are something that, you know, as you correctly said, you have to spend a lot of time. It's not, a PowerPoint presentation, an agreement, sign on the dotted line. This requires getting face to face, right? And establishing, that trust, show that you're, transparent. And I think that that breaks down a lot of the traditional barriers, even with a procurement team.
No, no. So no, I think that's correct. And if you see the value continuously being exchanged, then it can only get better and better, right? So before I move to I have to pick your brain on leadership. But before I do that, I want to pick your final vision on the technology again, right? And logistics. So I think if if I'm not wrong, so what has happened in the logistics and tech in last 5 years is four times bigger than what happened 20 years before that, right? It was super fast, and now we're talking into agentic AI. So how you see the data, supply chain data collaboration or logistics data collaboration as a next frontier? I mean, do you see real time network optimization? Do you see AI predictive models? Do you see agent doing, I don't know, 50% of the job? Give me your future vision here.
All of the above. I think it's really doing away with exception management as a role, right? Having to recognize that there's an issue
Yeah.
and understand, what actions do I need to take? Now, you still have to have a handle on your processes
Mhm.
and on your data, or else, again, automation only provides, potential potential value, but a lot of frustration when it goes wrong, right? So if you don't have your data and you don't have your processes in check, then I think that can hold, back certain parts of the, ecosystem from getting the same value out of what I see are, you know, AI agents, working together with other AI agents, you know, orchestrating, you know, um, sort of uh, positive loops to say, I know that these goods are not going to make it on the store shelves in time. How do we, bring uh, goods in from another facility? How do we look at the differences in modes? How do we procure that separate mode, right? How do we, provide it, a alternate supplier, whatever the case may be, and it'll be much more real time, right? So rather than getting the data, looking at a dashboard, looking for a decision, taking the decision, it could be days. This should happen, quite quickly. But again, any predictions I make on how valuable it's going to be for the industry has to be sort of tempered with the, if you don't have, your ducks in a row, if you don't have your data and your processes in order, there's limited value you're going to get from what I see is going to be, really big in the next, definitely in the next 5 years. But again, I think it'll be lopsided as to how much value it brings across the supply chain versus rewarding those who have really spent, the time and effort making sure that they're ready to use the technology.
Yeah, yeah. Slightly off script question. I know we align the question, but I'm gonna ask this because listening to you, and I'm an entrepreneur myself, we're doing learning for last 4 years. I think, especially now, maybe not before, but now, making a software technology solution is dead easy. Agents can do it. anti-gravity and all that, right? But what is hardest part still is the collaboration, partnership, and distribution of the tech, because this is where the money is right now. And when I look at you, I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, this guy is commercially super sound, very good in people skills, know the tech enough to sell it. Why wouldn't you do your own startup? Why you would still, do you think?
I think
Yeah.
that's that's a great question, and some of the reasons why have to do with my circumstances. I'm in Copenhagen, but I'm American, so I require a work permit. And so therefore I need to make sure that I've got an employer to sponsor me. So there are some challenges there. Now, can those be overcome? Of course I can. Of course I can. But I think I just really double see that I'm done providing value, for companies yet, in order to go and then try to go and often do it myself. So I think I still have a lot more to give, to a particular, whether it's a software company, whether it's a carrier, or other. It could be, working with startups. Um, Something that I definitely have an interest in. I'm speaking to a couple, in a friendly way in order to provide some insights, and I get some insights in return. Again, win-win scenario. So, great question. Don't know if you'll see that happening this year, but definitely something that I think I'm heading towards.
Towards.
Just not yet.
Not so basically, okay. So it's, you still think there's a lot of value to offer to a company, and then we'll see how it goes. So it makes sense. Now move to your leadership style. And you are Danish or not?
American.
American, right? So you worked in Denmark, you worked in Australia, WiseTech, you work in USA. That means you have a great experience of cross culture, cross market, especially in commercial role. So what is your overarching, let's call it, biggest lesson learned in a leadership capability?
I think that it's split. I think that semantics have a lot to do with, um, you know, making sure that you're getting the right message across. So what is easily understood. I said ducks in a row earlier, right? Maybe to an American, having your ducks in a row makes sense. It may not mean the same thing or be universally understood. So I think one of the lessons I've learned is, you really have to look to see who is your audience. Is it global? Is it local? Right? If it's global, are you using the correct terminology? Again, you know, terms like drayage, right? Detention and demurrage can mean different things depending on where you are in the world. So this is definitely a lesson learned. And that goes into, I guess, the don't assume that all users have the same needs. And this, I'm really looking at my sort of software and application development, periods where, just a quick example, we went out when I was working for Maersk to Foxconn in China, mainland China, in Shenzhen. So we were very proud that we've created this booking overview, right, for the website application, and wanted to get their feedback. A bit of it was, validation that we were looking for. So again, through translators, it was, how do you like it? We like it very much. What part of it do you like? We like it very much. Fast forward in the conversation to, you know, hey, let's be open and honest and transparent. you know, what do you really like about it? Because it was just all very high level. And the response was not what we expected. Well, we wish you wouldn't change anything. What do you mean? Well, we have a staff that is just handling this piece of the booking process, right? They're creating the booking, they know where everything goes, they hit send, they're done. Your booking overview and the changes you've made to the booking process online, although those might be valuable to, a user in Denmark, a user in the US, a user in Australia, didn't meet the needs of the user in China, at least those particular users, that we were visiting. So, you know, I think that that is the lesson learned, which is you can't come with an opinion that you come up with yourself and say a booking overview provides value to everyone when you don't actually have that validated with the users. And, again, good lesson learned and lesson that I carry.
That's why. I mean, my one of my favorite recent learning is this, this whole book of Lean Startup, the concept of MVP, right? And I think MVP is not just valid to product development and product testing. I think you could apply in anything, in a commercial launch, product launch, even testing a project. Change management. I think it's which you are saying the same thing. Localize it, talk to the user, learn what they want, and then take it from there. Now, if I and the technology is getting ridiculously fast, the implementation of that, right? That means the threat of human doing stuff is only going to get greater, right? But what humans are very good at is human skills, people skills. That means it's becoming more important, in my view, right? That AI will never, in my view, as long as at least I live, if I live another 40 years, it's not going to happen, right? I know you can create an avatar of me who can speak like me, maybe talk like me, but you cannot have the energy with you and I can, as a people can exchange. So if you have to pick one human skill, which you think gonna be really the differentiator, what that would be?
I think it's your ability to put yourself in the shoes of the other person and be that what creates a win-win scenario for the partnerships, what provides value to the user who is interacting with your website applications. I think it's that ability to sort of empathize with, the challenges and the needs of the person across the table. And I don't see AI taking that role. I think that role will continue to exist. Um, I think we are going to see a lot of efficiencies elsewhere, but I really think it's that ability to understand the person across the table from you and what their needs are so that you can further the partnership, provide, the correct service, whatever the case may be.
That's absolutely correct. Very inspiring. Now, we already been talking about more than 40 minutes, right? I think 45 now. So I want to move to a conclusion, and we have a segment called Quickfire. In that one, I'm going to really read the question, and you literally have to answer it like quickly. You can't go elaborate. Okay? Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, bound ready. So I'm going to ask this. Let's start. Like, where's my questions? Here's my questions, right? Okay, right. So, how do you keep yourself learning ahead of the curve and in a such fast-moving, intensive requirement?
It's a mix of my networking, seeing who's out there, what are they doing, and learning from that. I also use, online learning tools. Coursera is one that I use, but I'm going to be looking up uh, yours as well to see on what it is to have you offer, because I think that you always have to keep learning. If you don't, unfortunately, you're going to get left behind, especially with how quickly things are moving with AI
Absolutely.
now. Um, it is super important to leverage that extra time that you have in order to get some, sort of online learning underway.
Yes. I mean, I'm going to skip this one because you explain your philosophy of collaboration. So, I'm gonna move to next one. Most common myth about data partnership you often have to debunk.
So it's that all data is created equal, right?
Hey, beta, created equal.
All and it's not, right?
Yes.
I think that's the biggest myth is, okay, I can get the location of this container from this source, but again, who are you getting it from? Where did they get it? How latent is it? How is the accuracy of that data? I think that you know, even though the data point may be the same, you have to diversify and really look to see, am I getting the data from the correct source, right? Or am I just getting the data point I'm looking for? But it's again back to trust. Can you automate based on data you don't trust? Most likely not.
Yeah. Okay, cool. A book or a podcast or maybe a thinker who has influenced your approach of data analytics.
Okay. So it's kind of, I guess you'd call him an influencer. It's one of the managers I had in Maersk early on in my career. His name was Steen. It still is. And he said to me, sat me down, talking about, the website applications and their development, and said, be careful not to institutionalize waste. And
Uh,
so Steen is my answer, and that's what he brought to the table, was that philosophy, not institutionalizing waste.
Amir, that line could actually apply globally to any institution, isn't it? I think that's such a profound thought. Uh, let's do not institutionalize waste. Very good. So, biggest aha moment of your career in supply chain technology?
That's a tough one because there probably, meant dozens of them. I would say it goes back to something I said earlier. It's the role of IT procurement. So I worked for Maersk for 15 years before, going to INTTRA and working across, the INTTRA suite of top ocean carriers, and had to work back with Maersk. Now here, I'm like, I worked at Maersk for 15 years. This should be easy, um, and instead of being able to get back with my commercial folks, I got sent to IT procurement, who I didn't know and just wanted to know, how can we make the price less, get more for less, right? And I think that was the biggest aha moment, is, flipping from the carrier to the software provider. I thought, this is going to be easy, and it was not,
It was.
because who stood in my way? IT procurement.
Uh-huh. Okay, the last one, if I thought I was gonna ask. Yes, I can remember now. So, if you are advising to any logistics tech startup into data, if they're making any data-driven solution, what one advice that will be?
It's back to what Steen said. Don't institutionalize waste. The, you know, it's fast paced, the startup world, you're going to end up, unfortunately, cutting corners. But if those corners that you're cutting are actual core problems and issues, look, at a quick example, um, carrier onboarding, right, is a problem. Or, it could be even supplier onboarding, right? They may not be technically able. It may take months. You need, that to be days or weeks instead of months. So what do? Apply AI or AI agents to that problem. Have you solved the core problem, or have you made up for solving the core problem by, you know, putting an AI agent in there, or following up, reading the PDFs, reading the emails, getting the pieces of data that's required? But have you truly moved the industry forward, or have you just solved or masked the actual problem? So that's my advice, is be careful not to institutionalize waste. Sometimes, the reward is there, but again, think about the core problems that you're trying to solve. And if you're not solving them, then unfortunately, you're going to end up having to go back and deal with that, or not deal with that, depending on, what the direction that you end up taking.
Fine. I said it was last one. Probably not. I'm gonna try this one as well. Let's see how it goes. And it's definitely a last one, right? Um, you know so much. You work for so many logistics companies. So, do you think there is any blind spot and you wish? And doesn't matter technology exists or not. So don't constrain your answer with technology. Just think like every technology is available. That that is, I wish that kind of startup existed in logistics. Do you have this idea ever? I wished that startup existed, or that company existed, or that problem should be solved. Because I'm keep thinking on this idea of waste, right? And I'm thinking, then you must know something which not a lot of people know, and I'm really want to get out of you.
I think that there are companies out there doing it to a point, but I really think it's, if a startup could come in and truly make a difference when it came to standardization of, you know data exchange, is probably the biggest pain point, right? So there are companies who can integrate, and help you integrate with multiple parties because they've done it, right? But it's still inefficient somewhere, right?
Yeah.
They've still had to deal with, okay, well, CMA does it this way, and this port and terminal does it the other way, and Maersk does it a third way, right? And, so you've simplified it, right? But you've still had to do all the work, right? So someone who can come in and actually make a difference. And, and again, the DCSA, is a body out there, fighting the good fight on this one. But I think, again, it's having the momentum uh, of a startup, versus what they have to deal with, which is getting, you know, all of the conversations going, getting all of the agreements, having to deal with, you know, different variations of who can or can't do X, Y, or Z. I think, you know, I would love to see a startup come in and disrupt that. Not saying that they can. I'm just, you asked the question, and that's my answer. Would love to see.
There's someone who's like, this 10. That's very, very interesting. And I think this is almost this whole Apple theory, right? Let's standardize everything, the connectors and all that, or this whole, I think there was a debate between Blu-ray or infrared. I forgot that, like, Blu-ray end up winning as a technology, right? And it's also happening right now in the space of AI, that you want to standardize the MCPs and all that. So I think that's pretty good. So it will be, I think your idea is great that somehow we standardize, and so you're right that the integrations are done, but it's still ineffective, right? The syncing is a problem, the feed is a problem, how frequently you send the data is a problem. Still, all of that is there. Mike, I think you and me can talk more. We already spent about 50 plus minutes, man. I mean, I think in addition, what I my takeaway from you is following, right? I think the data and the quality is of that, and the collaboration. So the existence of data is important, but what is more important is the how you build the collaboration and partnership to make it use for the effectiveness of the humankind, i.e. business, right? So that's very, I think, what I learned from you today. Again, I really admire your leadership and leadership, and the way you talked about different cultures and understanding the user, and the change management of this was pretty good. And I wish we could meet in person, because there's something I can see definitely. I don't like to work for a lot of people, but I would say I would work for you for at least for a couple of years. Maybe not longer, but definitely a couple of years to learn from you. That's a big compliment, by the way. That's a massive. It has the compliment. Yes, yes, is a massive compliment, because I think you have a very good energy. I think you have a lot to give, and you almost look like somebody who will always have a good advice to give, right? And that's what you need for in the boss, right? Not to tell you what to do, is to good advice to give, and a direction to make stuff. So I appreciate and thank you for your time. Any last thoughts?
I think, again, thank you for today. And I really hope that I've made an impression on someone or multiple someones out there,
At least on
and make them that much more willing to look at something a bit differently and say, can we find a win-win here? Can we collaborate? And if I've done that, then I've done my job today.
Thank you again, Mike. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, because not a lot of people are kind enough to do it, and you are. So at SCM Dojo, myself, we thank you a lot, right? Because it's very much appreciated. That shows your generous personality of giving to the community. And for the audience, thank you for watching. If you like this video, please, as always, like, share, and subscribe. Mike DeAngelis is on LinkedIn. I will share his LinkedIn profile in the description when we share the video. By all means, contact him. And for any big company, startup, if you're looking for advisor, consultant, maybe a leader, Mike is here for you. All right. Ciao. Thank you for watching.